Hello, good evening. How are you? Have you had your dinner? Not yet. Some yes, some no. Okay, so far, any questions regarding the previous two lectures? If no, then I will start session 2 for contract law. So, if you still remember last time, we talked about offer and acceptance, right? Which are among the essential elements for contracts. And tonight, I'm going to talk about consideration, intention, capacity, and different types of contracts and terms. And later tonight, I would also brief you about the seminar project and the in-class activity, right? And you should have received my announcement telling you to form groups, right? Not yet? Have you read my announcement, right? In fact, some students have already formed their groups. If you have not yet done so, please do so as quickly as possible because I set a deadline asking you to inform me your group members. Okay, so say during the breaks, you may also find some of your classmates to form a group. Okay, consideration. So essentially, it needs to be of some value, valuable consideration. Okay. And it is required for contracts other than a deed. Last time we also talked about deed, right? So it is generally required for consideration, but for deed, that is an exemption. So without considerations, contracts are not valid, right? Not valid. So there must be some sort of consideration for a contract except a deed. So you may cite this precedent to support this principle. So this is the principle of, now this term again, you can see it is in italics, meaning it is Latin, okay? But the meaning is something in exchange for something. Something in exchange for something, right? So that enables the formation of a contract. That is what we call consideration. So consideration is defined as could either be, say, the right, some sort of interest, profit, or benefit, or some forbearance, detriment, or loss, or responsibility. So these things are positive, right? Right, profit, benefit. These are positive. These things, forbearance, loss, and so on, these are negative. Okay, negative. So it's quite common that, say, you have to pay, settle a payment, which is negative to you, but you can get a service. The service could be an enjoyment that is positive to you, right? So it is something in exchange for something. Consideration. So here are some very important principles for consideration. The first one is it needs to be executory. This could be possible, executory. And let me quickly show you what they are, and then I will explain them one by one. And it could also be executed, but could not be passed. Okay, so these three important principles. Executory, to do something which will bring about the act of the contract at a later date. Executory, that means not yet executed. Will be executed, going to realize. Example to help your understanding, party A buys a pump and promises to pay. Party B agrees to deliver the pump, okay, within the same period. Then this is an exchange of promises that will support the contract. This is the kind of executory consideration because this is a kind of promise not yet realized. It is to be executory, not yet executed, okay, not yet done. This is something in future. It could be next day, next week, 2 weeks later, 1 month later. So executory consideration is a good consideration, okay, that is valid, has still to be given, that means to be executed, not yet executed, will be sufficient to support the contract. So this is a good consideration, and it is among the essential elements for a contract, okay? The second principle, consideration may be executed, right? So this one, the previous one, not yet executed, but this one is executed. Is it possible? Where one or both parties have already performed their contractual duty. Now, if I just ask you to memorize the first bullet point, to memorize this principle is difficult because this statement does not help much in your understanding of that principle. The best thing is to refer to an example. Example here, party A, have paid for the computer. Then he would have executed, he paid already. So that is executed, right? Okay. But the computer has not yet been delivered. So the other party, party B, is due to deliver. So you paid, say, $10,000 for the computer at the shop. And then the seller said, okay, the computer will be delivered to you 1 week later, 3 days later, right? Okay. So, but the payment in this case is executed, right? Done already, okay? So the payment already made is executed, which is still good consideration. Has been given for the contract and supports the contract. The third principle, consideration must not be passed. Must not be passed. That means what? Must not have happened already. Again, if I ask you to memorize this, it's difficult to understand, right? The rule is that past consideration is no considerations. That means if you had made a past consideration, that consideration is not regarded as valid, as proper. No, okay? As illustrated in the Anderson and Glass case. Now that case, Glass is that party, okay, this party, had promised his employee Anderson here, an increase in wages, okay, to increase salary, okay? The increase was to apply not only to the future, but also to be backdated to the salaries in the past. Anderson sought to enforce this promise. This guy sued Glass, okay, sought to enforce his promise because Glass promised that there will be increases in wages. It was held that the promise as to the future was enforceable. The promise of increasing the wages for the next month, next year is enforceable. But the promise of backdated pay was not enforceable. Because what? That was clearly passed and did not support the promise. So in this case, it illustrates the principle of past consideration is no consideration. Okay. Consideration must move from the promisee, okay, from the promisee. So what does it mean? If a promisee wishes to enforce an agreement, he must show that he has personally suffered a detriment like a suffering, which is something not good, okay? Not good, negative. Or confer the benefit on the promiser. Confer the benefit. Provides benefit, offers benefit, provide, for example, a service on the promiser. So it's merely being a party to the transaction is insufficient. We have the concept, the principle of privity of contract. Now the contract usually is between two parties, A and B. So if there's a contract between A and B, the link is here. between A and B. If there is a third party, party C has nothing to do with this contract between A and B. Okay, so then we call this one between A and B, there is privity of contract. But between C and B or between C and A, there's no privity of contract. Okay, so it's none of C's business. Okay, all right. So for example, okay, A is going to sell a ladder to B, okay? And B is going to use that ladder to do some repair work for C. Selling a ladder is a contract between A and B. Doing repair work is a contract between B and C. Okay, so C has nothing to do with the contract regarding the selling of a ladder. It is indirect. Okay. So another quite famous precedent that would illustrate the principle of privity of contract is the case between Dunlop and Selfridge. You know Dunlop, right? It's a famous company manufacturing tire, right? Tire for vehicles, you know, okay? And Selfridge is a company, and that case is back in 1915. So here are some facts, okay? I would like you to take a quick look at these facts and then also the judgment held, okay, by the court here. I give you, say, 2 minutes and see whether you can understand what these facts mean and what these judgments represent. I would explain them to you, okay? Now, to help your understanding, a good way to do so is, because usually we have some parties, right? Dunlop, Selfridge, and we sometimes will have contractual links and so on, right? You can draw some sort of block diagram or simple sketches, right? To show the relationship between different parties involved. Okay, that would help you understand, have a good picture of the case here. Okay, so try to understand this. And after 2 minutes, I will show you how to understand based on these facts. So are you able to understand the story, the facts, the decision held? Yes, please raise your hand. No, please raise your hand. If no, that means all of you understand, right? Then I don't need to explain. Anyone who does not understand, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. That's why I need to explain. So very often, as I said, to help our understanding be better, draw some diagrams, okay? If you still remember last time, I showed you some diagrams like this, right? Remember? This time, you can draw some sketches on your own like this. Well, we have Dunlop, right? Then we have the agents, A, B, C, D, E, and so on, right? So there are contrasts between Dunlop and these agents, selling of tires, okay? So Dunlop sells tires, these agents pay money to Dunlop, okay? And this is a contract. In this contract, it is stated that the price should not be less than the retail price, okay? Then between the agent and Selfridges here, okay? There's also a contract, okay? Selling of tire and then payment of money. And then this company, Selfridge, sells tires down to the customer, maybe the car owner, okay? This customer has to pay Selfridge a certain sum of money for the tire. But it happens that this amount is less than the retail price, okay? So why, it was held that between Y and Selfridge, Y is the agent here, and Selfridge, between Y and Selfridge, there was a contract, okay? But between Dunlop and Selfridge, no privity of contract, because what? The contract is between Dunlop and Y, and the contract is between Y and Selfridge, but no contract between Dunlop and Selfridge. Okay? So that's why Selfridge could not sue Dunlop. Okay? Selfridge may sue this agent, and this agent may sue Dunlop because there are contracts between them. Okay? Understand? So to understand these texts, which way is better? By just reading the text or drawing a diagram? Drawing a diagram, right? So that's why in your coming seminar project, you will also have the chance to draw these sort of diagrams, what I call relationship diagram. Okay, I will explain to you later for the task for the seminar project. One of the tasks is to draw a relationship diagram for the case that you are going to handle. Okay, so this is, I believe, is a good training and also a good way of learning of legal knowledge. Okay, if I just ask you to read text, right, it's quite difficult for you to understand the whole picture, right? Okay. Another important principle is consideration must be sufficient, need not be adequate. So if you take out the meaning of sufficient or the meaning of adequate from a dictionary, you may find that these two words are interchangeable, similar or even same meaning, right? But in legal sense, legal English, here, sufficient is different from adequate. Consideration must be of some value, but the quantum of relative value is of no concern. It doesn't matter whether it is 1 cent or $1, 1,000, 10,000, doesn't matter. As long as it carries some value, that's good enough. Okay. A consideration with some financial or economic value, although it may be small, is recognized by law as valuable consideration. Okay. That's why you commonly find in contracts saying, well, this contract consideration is $1, right? No matter how small it is, there is a consideration. Okay. So sufficient, meaning what? As long as there is some value, that is sufficient. Adequate in this legal sense is something more than sufficient. Okay. So it doesn't require a value which is much higher than the minimum sufficient level. No matter how small it is already sufficient. Okay. Promissory estoppel. This is again another important concept and principle in contract law. When A has made to the other a representation, say even it could be in words or in conduct, intended to affect their legal relations and be acted upon, then once B, the other party, this is a contract between A and B, B has relied on it, that means rely on what A has mentioned, and acted to his detriment and carry out something. For example, provide a service, carry out a work, repair work, or whatever. Okay. Then A, the original party, cannot afterwards be allowed to reverse meaning go back, okay, to the original legal relations. That means they have promised already, they could not go back. This is what we call promissory estoppel. Okay. So once they have promised, the promise could not be reverted. As illustrated in the Central London Property Trust and High Trees case. This is quite a famous case called, in short, High Trees case. So the facts, let me see. Now, the facts, this is that building, High Trees House, right? High Trees House. I hope you can see the words here, right? High Trees House, right? Okay. So it is this case, High Trees House. Okay. So the case was about defendants, the plaintiff let the defendants a block of flats at this level of rent, £2,500. Now the time matters. It was in year 1937. Then 3 years later, 1940, the defendants, because of the war, at that time, were unable to let many of the flats. Then the plaintiffs agreed to reduce the rent to half, 2,500, half meaning what? 1,250. And then 5 years later, 1945, the flats were again fully let because what? After the war, economy improved. The plaintiff company brought the action against the defendant, claiming the full original rent. Original rent is 2,500, both for the future and as a test case for the last 2 quarters of 1945. For future, that means after 1945, for the past 2 quarters, also, just past 1945. The action succeeded. Full rent was payable for the last 2 quarters of 1945. Then what? However, the plaintiffs sued for the full rent between 1940 and 1945 would have failed because what? They would have been stopped. Okay, could not go back, revert their promise. So to help your understanding, maybe I can show you a short video explaining the principles of consideration.
Do you find the rules on consideration contract law a bit complicated?
What's your answer to this question? Do you find the rules relating to consideration in contract law a bit complicated? If yes, pay attention to the following.
This video will help. It explains what consideration is and introduces the rules on how to spot whether something will or will not amount to consideration. So, what exactly is consideration? There's no contract without both contractual parties giving something. This can be described as an exchange of benefit. Consideration may be financial, or it might take some other form, such as providing a service. Generally, that's obvious enough. But when you're studying law, there are some tricky questions that can come up in relation to consideration. Supposing what looks like a really one-sided deal is agreed. Can something that you did in the past before the current agreement with be consideration? Can something I've already agreed to anyway? What about the legal obligation to do so? And can part pay under the debt and liability the balance owing? Let's have a look at each of these 5 questions. The consideration has to have some value, but it need not represent what might be considered adequate value. In other words, what may seem like a really bad deal, but nevertheless, consideration.
This is the principle I mentioned. So it needs to be of some value, but some cases, the price could be not good. That is a bad deal, right? Say for paying a service, FM service, right? Maybe a good estimate, a proper estimate for the service value is 1 million. But because maybe due to the market competition, the contractor quotes a much lower price, say it's 0.8 million. So that is a bad price, right? That is not a good deal. But it doesn't matter as long as there is a consideration. That is a consideration, or no matter that price is proper or not proper. Okay, still a consideration.
Do not need to consider whether the good deal is being struck, but there must be some exchange of benefit involved. So, in Chapel & Company, in Nestlé Limited, Nestlé, the defendants were offering a promotional deal on the wrappers and chocolate bars. 3 chocolate wrappers to be sent in to get a top ring. Chapel & Co. complained that the publisher of stock. Chapel argued that they were entitled to copyright royalties from Nestlé. To decide the case, it was crucial to identify whether there was a contract to sell the record between someone who sent wrappers in and the chocolate company, Nestlé. The court decided that just 3 chocolate wrappers was sufficient consideration. I've already done, given a promise in the past, the use of consideration in the contract. The short answer to this question is no. It's crucial that what is offered as consideration is not something that has already been done, given, or promised. For example, suppose Jay agrees to repair Peter's car without any promise of payment by the time of trouble. After the repair is finished, a grateful Peter promises.
So to repair the car is repaired before agreeing on the fee for the repair. Repair took place first, okay? But afterwards, it was promised to give a payment.
So it goes by, it comes to me, will not have payment. Does Jane have a legal contract? Can she claim £100? And the answer is that she cannot claim it. There is no mention of payment before Jane did the work, so the consideration she provided was in the past. And the work was not provided in exchange for the promise to pay by Peter. There are only 2 exceptions to this rule. but I won't go into this here. So just briefly, the first exception, where consideration, partial consideration by promise or request, and there was some kind of unspoken understanding between the parties that payment of some kind would be made in return. And the second exception is under the Bill of Exchange Act 1922, where partial consideration may be provided with consideration for the exchange. Can performance of an existing duty under a contract amount to consideration? Well, an existing duty means that you've already agreed in a contract to do something for the employer. Can you move that over, so to speak, to another contract? Look at the precedent of Still can Myrick. And Still can Myrick, things were not going well for the sailing ship during a long distance voyage. Two sailors deserted the ship. The captain, seeking to prevent other desertions, promised extra pay to the remaining 8 crew members in return for completing the voyage, which they accepted. However, when the ship arrived in port, the captain refused to pay this extra amount. Sailors took action for a breach of contract. The court decided that the crew member could not enforce the promise for extra pay, and they were already obliged to work on the ship and give the court of the existing contracts that were or supervised before setting sail. Only if the job became different from what was originally agreed would they be entitled to extra payment, as they would then have been going beyond their existing duties. For example, if, let's say, 4 or 5 sailors after the 2, the remaining would surely have had much more work. So this principle that an existing duty could not amount to consideration was well established in the court until the case of Williams and Rother Brothers. Now, Rother Brothers was the main contractor on the construction project, and Williams, firm of carpenters, subcontracted to Rother Brothers. Sometime after the building project had started, Williams backed out their contract, realising that they were underpriced and faced financial ruin. They completed the work at the agreed price. This jeopardised completion of the bill on the Rothy deadline. So Rothy, the contractually liable, pays the potential penalty to his client if the building is finished late. Rothy Brothers accepted the price too low and promised them significant extra payment if they completed the work, which Williams accepted. The work was therefore done in time, and in addition, new working methods were adopted by the firms, which were to the advantage of Rothy Brothers. However, Rothy Brothers refused to pay their promise, arguing that performance of existing duty could not amount to consideration, following that Still can Myrick principle below. So the court held that as Rothy Brothers had gained extra benefits through the change in working method by Williams and in other ways, Williams had in effect provided extra benefit and should be allowed to pay. So, since Williams had in effect,
this case is a little bit different from the previous case because what? Because the Rothy Bros in that case have received extra benefit, and Williams had adopted new, better working methods. So although there is an existing contract between the two, but the methods, the works is different from what is mentioned in the original contract.
provided that should be allowed to pay. So, since Williams and Rothy Brothers, it appears that the party promises to pay an extra payment, provision of goods or services, in return for an existing contractual duty. The performance, the extra payment can be by valid consideration, so long as the promisor receives some kind of extra benefit, however small. But in this case, they only regarded as applying existing contract goods or services, not to part and to them. The rules from that.
So it applies to supply goods or services, and this is very common in facility management. And we are not, I would say this is not of big concern. I mean, part payment of a debt, right, in usual FM practices. But this is a concern for, say, companies are operating some financial, having some financial operations, banking services, right? But for facility management, we are more concerned about supply goods or services.
What about a legal obligation to do something? And that's consideration. If someone has a legal obligation to do something, it cannot make consideration. Case law, example, leaves something to duty, tax system, or the obligation of juror to listen to a trial. Only if the person goes beyond their obligation and if that's something that could cause a deduction. It's about an existing contractual duty to pay a debt. Suppose that someone has a debt of £100. It's they have an existing duty to make payment contract. If the debtor makes an offer asking the creditor to accept, say, £50 to end liability for £400 out, will the creditor be legally bound if he accepts that? The answer is that part payment to the debt does not bring to an end liability for the full amount by the debt. That is considered. There are a few exceptions to this law. So whatever the creditor says about a debt paid, will not be legally obliged to the remainder of the debt. But notice that there will be consideration for this kind of agreement between a debtor and creditor, when the debtor must provide some new and extra benefit in return for part being accepted. For example.
Okay, now I think you at least have some basic ideas about considerations, and in order to help you better understand the ideas, I can copy this link and put it in the chat box. Okay, so that when we visit this video, you can click this link and then watch the video and revisit the ideas. Okay, so to further elaborate a bit more about this promissory estoppel principle, this principle can be used only as a defense, not as a cause of action. That means you could not, based on this principle, to take action to sue somebody, but you can take it as a defense, as a shield, not as a sword. Okay. The promisee must show that he has acted in a way relying on the promise. If you want to rely on this principle, you have to prove this, the second bullet point. The third point, the promisee must show that he has acted with fairness and equity. Okay, that means the promisee somewhat like innocent. Okay, and the fourth point is the effect of estoppel is to suspend rights rather than extinguish them. Suspend, that means hold, put it on hold. Extinguish, that means completely remove. It's different. Okay. Okay, intention. So we have offer, acceptance, consideration, and then we have two more, right? Intention and capacity. Okay. So intention, a key principle is if there are transactions which are social or domestic. So what do you mean by social or domestic? For example, transaction agreements between friends and close relatives. Okay. These are regarded as social or domestic, normally presumed to have no legal relation. Okay. as held as illustrated in this case, 1919. Balfours went to England on leave when the husband later returned to Ceylon. His wife was too ill to accompany him. So that is an issue between the husband and wife. Okay, so family members, husband and wives must be with close relationship, social or domestic. Okay, he, the husband, agreed to pay the wife a monthly allowance. However, the wife remained in England, but the husband ceased payment, stopped paying his wife. Okay, then the wife sued her husband. Okay. What was held? The agreement was not a contract, merely a domestic arrangement between the husband and wife. Could not be regarded as a commercial contract. Okay, there was no intention to create legal relations. Okay, so as simple as that. Okay. In contrast, in businesses, business transactions, commercial agreements generally presumed to be legally bound. It's different from agreement between friends, between family and wives, father and sons, mother and daughter. Different. Sale and purchase of goods and property, employment, tenancy agreements, these are generally regarded as having legal effect, legally bound contracts. The case you may cite to support this, Edwards and Skyways. The plaintiff was employed, this guy, as a pilot. Okay. This one, plaintiff, Edwards was the plaintiff. Under his contract, if he left his services, he had two options. Number one, withdraw his entire contributions to the pension fund. Number two, take his pension at the age of 55, quite early, right? Usually the retirement age now is 60, but in some organizations, that could be 55, right? So the facts, the plaintiff, this one, Edwards, the pilot. No right to the defendant's contribution to his pension fund if he left before the retirement age, before 55. The defendant then decided upon a redundancy plan, giving ex gratia payment, ex gratia payment, additional, extra payment. Okay. The plaintiff accepted redundancy. You know what redundancy is, right? People has to leave the company, right? Because the company will no longer need them. This is redundancy. And the plaintiff, that means the pilot, elected to withdraw his contributions to the pension fund and take the defendant's ex gratia payment. This is quite common for cases of early retirement, right? Early retire, take an extra sum of money that is called ex gratia payment. Okay. So the defendant, however, when age, that means what? They do not realize their promise to make the extra payment. That means didn't give the defendant, the plaintiff, the extra payment, ex gratia payment, and argue that the use of the word ex gratia indicated that it's a lack of intention to give legal effect to their promise. So what was held? In a commercial transaction, that party had the onus to prove that it was so. If when a party argued that the agreement was not intended to have legal effect. So if one argues that, oh, that is not a commercial contract, then that party has to prove that it was really not a commercial contract without any legal binding intention. The use of the term ex gratia only indicated that the defendant did not admit that it had any pre-existing liability to make the payment. The defendant had not discharged the onus of proof. The promise was not intended to be legally binding. That is, the intention of being legally bound existed. So in short, commercial contract usually is regarded to be legally bound. Okay. It's different from social domestic agreements. Okay, then I think I would like to stop here for a short break as promised. Okay, then I will continue with the remaining part for intention. Okay. So for those who have not yet formed your groups for the project, please take this opportunity to find some friends to form up your groups, okay? You have to form groups for the project and also the in-class activity.